Okay, so here is my review of Celebrity Traitors episode 2. So I've just finished watching it. So we've obviously just found out that the traitors are going to be murdering their first victim on the show. Alan said it's not going to be easy. And yeah, so basically, we kind of just see the traitors all talking to each other. And then, yeah, Kat and Jonathan by default just said, look, Alan, it's going to have to be you. And then we just see Alan talking to Ruth and Paloma in the kitchen. I think Paloma's just holding a drink, and then Ruth is holding like these cakes. So we don't actually get to see what happened straight away. But I think at this point I was like, hang on, Ruth's holding all these cakes. Maybe she's going to give a bad cake to someone, or maybe he's going to, make the cake go on her face, because obviously he has to touch someone's face in order for them to be murdered. So yeah, we kind of see the before, but we don't really see the actual action. Ruth, yeah, she's obviously saying to Paloma and Alan that Claire is a threat because she's quite smart. I spelled Claire wrong, but that's fine. And then outside, Jonathan was walking out of the house, and he kind of looked at Alan, like he kind of looked over and was like, hang on, why is Alan outside? He's got like a mini task to do. And then he looked over and just went, all done. So, he just was quite obviously explaining to Jonathan that the mission had been complete. And then we found out when the traitors met up with each other that Alan had chosen Paloma, and then you saw the little replay of it happening where, she has a little bit of something on her face and he just, touches the hair off. So, yeah, I think it's one of those things that it's now obviously up to her as to whether she reveals whether something strange happened or whether an encounter happened, or, he may have actually got away with that. And then at breakfast, Jonathan and Ruth were having a quick chat, and they basically just said, look, in 3, 2, 1, let's just say a name of someone we think could be a traitor. So Jonathan thought it was Nico, Ruth thought it was Kate, and Jonathan also said that Stephen Fry thinks that Nico could be a traitor as well. Claire also said, focus on the loudest people. So she was talking to Kat at this point, kind of looking straight over at Kate, thinking, look, Kate's over-exaggerating a little bit. And then we'll move on to the next part in a different screenshot. All right, so anyway, Jonathan and Kate both were shouting that apparently they felt like someone had been recruited. Alan said it was a bit of a stretch for his acting ability to try and not make anything obvious or not obvious. And then, I can't quite read the next bit. So, yeah, Alan said it was a bit of a stretch for his acting. And Tom explained that he felt that Kate was being a lot louder than usual. The fact that, she was just over-exaggerating, over-emotional, just, oh, wow, like that kind of vibe. Almost kind of like Princess Peach vibes, really. And Kate, and obviously they were saying, I think Charlotte said something like, maybe somebody has done something unusual, and she then added, well, maybe unusual and risky, something that you wouldn't presume to have happened. And then, yeah, Ruth was handing around marshmallows. Alan said, maybe that could have been the person to have infected somebody. And Paloma explained that she's had so few interactions, she doesn't think that she's been caught or taken out of the game. The only thing that she remembers is that Nico hugged her. I think that at this point, Claudia had obviously told them that someone had been murdered in plain sight. So I think that at this point, they were all just kind of retracting, remembering all the different interactions as to who's been touched, who's been handed a drink, who's been given a drink, who's given a drink out, who's eaten something or gone into a certain room with someone. So they were all just kind of questioning everything at this point. And then you got here, so Jonathan Ross explained to Kate that her name has been mentioned a few times. So she was kind of a bit in shock. So obviously knowing that, going into the round table, she's going to have to try and back herself up. Tom and Charlotte were having a chat, and they were saying, I think Tom basically hinted that, some of the names of people that are going to go under the radar are like Nico, Lucy, David, people that are usually seen as sweet. They're usually, at least one of those could potentially be a traitor or give off traitor vibes. And then I think Nico walked past them and was like, what do you guys think? And things like that. And I think he kind of said something like, obviously we're all focusing on who it could be. We should be looking at the ones who we don't think it could be, or something like that. I'm not really too sure what he said. But Tom basically said that, yeah, Nico was kind of stirring the pot there. Paloma Faith walked past and she was like, oh, look, it's the clever ones at Tom and Charlotte. Celia was sitting outside with 3 of the guys. So she was sitting out there with Joe W., Alan and Jonathan. And she said she doesn't trust Charlotte, she doesn't trust Joe Wilkinson, and she doesn't trust Alan. And Joe Wilkinson basically said, you need to ignore who you think it might be and actually ignore who you think it might be, and the ones that you don't think it is are the ones that it's most likely to be. And then she also pointed out Alan, saying, you're the type of person that probably wouldn't be a good traitor, but actually then would because of your type of personality. So yeah, it was an interesting array of opinions from Celia, but it's almost like she got that in the open. And then Joe W was like, well, basically I'm surrounded by 3 traitors then, well, 2 of which are, and obviously Celia isn't. Shock. Okay, so the next part of the show, they basically went back to their coffins. So they went back to the graveyard where Claudia had taken them at the beginning of the show, and there was £9,000 up for grabs. So 3 coffins, I think 3,000 per coffin, and yeah, they basically just had to decide based on a clue who each coffin was about, basically, and obviously one of those 3 was obviously that person who got murdered from the show. So for the first box, the first clue was something to do with like history or politics or something, and the second clue was a ballot box, and obviously they've realised that there was a whole story about Nico running for the mayor of London, so they knew that coffin belonged to him. The second coffin, the first clue was about airwaves and something to do with a task. So Lucy thought it was to do with her because she's been on Taskmaster and things like that. Nick thought it was him because it's something about, the space rocket came out at the time of his show. And yeah, they ended up choosing Nick. But then after they found out that the third clue was something to do with Hull, Lucy was like, oh my goodness, it's actually to do with me because, she's got her radio show. Apollo, I think, was maybe a name of a show that she was on, and she's obviously from Hull as well. So yeah, they got that one wrong. And then for the third coffin, the first clue was just a black and white tie, and they thought, that could either be for St Trinian's, which is a school, or David thought it could have been himself supporting Newcastle, the football team. So they actually weren't sure. And then the third clue was something to do with like love, or the memory is created, but the words that the story is over, but the words still live on, or something like that. And then Tom thought, well, hang on, Paloma, you've actually got a song called Only Love Can Hurt Like This. So yeah, in the end, it was Nico, Lucy and Paloma who were the 3 potential people to be removed from the game. As a team, they chose Lucy. And yeah, it was quite interesting because at this point, people weren't just focusing on the action that was happening, they were actually focusing on each other. I could see, I think his name was Mark, looking over at Tamika. Tamika was looking elsewhere. The traitors were kind of all looking around as well, like not making it obvious that they're traitors. And obviously it wasn't Lucy, so they got that part wrong as well. They could have added an extra 4,000. And then kind of on the way back, Tom said he had suspicions of Claire and Kate, with Ruth saying, Claire? Like, why Claire? Claire doesn't seem suspicious at all. Mark said, he already had his suspicions on Tamika, but he now has his suspicions on Kate. Claire questioned whether it could be Alan. The fact that he was so close to Paloma is actually even more of a reason for him to do it, because then it makes him the least likely one, but then the most likely to be a traitor. So it's one of those, double-ended swords or whatever it's called. And then Kat was saying to Tom, Alan and Charlotte that Kate was a little bit over-exaggerated, a little bit over like just too much emotion. Tom actually agreed with that, so did Charlotte, and he actually said, I was thinking Kate as well. And finally, we had the round table. So there was 19,500. They kind of brought up the fact of Kate being overreactive, being a bit ham, not giving up her shield, Nico giving off traitor vibes, and Tamika's change in behaviour. Tamika then replied back to Mark saying that he kind of separated himself from the group, was focusing on other things rather than the actual action that was going on. Joe W said he doesn't think it's Nico, he thinks it's potentially Tom, and Nico said, don't choose me because you could then be chosen next if you're actually wrong. In terms of the votes, these are the votes we had so far. So Ruth, Tamika and Kat all voted for Kate. Alan, Joe M and Lucy voted for Nico. Mark voted for Tamika, Nico voted for Tom, and it was just about to be Stephen's vote, but then episode 2 ended. So what do you all think of episode 2? What do you think so far? There's a lot that's going on, so obviously I can only do 10 minutes of analysis, but yeah, there's a lot going on in the series so far. So let me know what you're thinking, and yeah, reply back to this if you are up to series 2 at least already. Not series 2, episode 2. Anyway, enough of this review, and moving on to another review. I need to watch episode 3.